Well, we'll get on into our message this morning. We're going to be in Acts chapter 14. I thought I'd start with something humorous again, and found a story about a guy who was looking for a new job, and he decides to try the zoo. He goes and puts in an application. Well, while he's sitting there talking in the interview, it turned out that the gorilla had just passed away the day before. And they hadn't announced it to the public yet. They didn't want him to know. And so they offered to the man, if you would put on a gorilla suit and go out into the cage, then we'll pay you for that job. And he thought, well, that's kind of interesting. I could do that. And so he puts on a gorilla suit and he walks out into the cage pretending to be a gorilla. And the people were interested in him, and he was kind of having fun. And so he started to kind of really play it up. You know, he wanted to do a good job to keep his job. He wanted to do really good. And the people started cheering him on and clapping for him the more that he did. So he starts walking around and he starts throwing stuff. And then he starts getting more and more playful. And this is going on. The more he did, the more the crowd and the audience was just eating it up. So pretty soon he's putting on just a grand show. He's jumping on things. He's swinging from ropes and up into the trees until finally he loses his balance. He slips and he goes flying across through a safety net and lands in the neighboring cage where the lion exhibit is. And he falls to the ground and he's kind of dazed a little bit and he's stunned. And then all of a sudden he hears a lion start to roar and then charge straight after him. He goes, oh no, help me, help me, help me. And the lion comes up and puts his mighty claw right on his chest. And then he starts to speak to him. He says, hey, quiet in there, we'll both lose our jobs. Okay, well, enough of such tomfoolery. Okay, so we're in chapter 14 this morning, and we're continuing the missionary journey of Paul and Barnabas as they continue on. And what I'm kind of hoping to do, and I hope it fits, I hope it makes sense, and I hope that you're somehow blessed and challenged through it. But I thought this Christmas season, let's just continue our story of Acts and look for things within it that might help us understand something about the Christmas season. And so it's going to be a bit of a hodgepodge deal here, I suppose, but we'll see what we can do. In chapter 14, the book of Acts, there's a couple more cities that are mentioned where Paul and Barnabas visits. They go to Iconium and then to Lystra, the city of Lystra. Now in the first city, Iconium, they're there and they're boldly proclaiming Jesus like they have been. They spend a considerable amount of time working with people, talking with them, telling them that the Messiah had come. And because of it, many people believe their message. And they turn to the faith in Jesus. And they join them. They join in the belief that Jesus is the Messiah. And yet, on the other hand, there are many that did not. And again, in particular, the Jews that were not accepting that Jesus was the awaited Messiah began to create division and even come against Paul and Barnabas like they have at every turn. And so there's these two feuding sides begin to emerge in the city of Iconium. And like before, this division begins in the city, and those sides that were against Paul and Barnabas began scheming against them, the text said. And they even started to mistreat them, and then they plotted to stone them to death again, to stone them again. This has happened before. And in this time, Paul and Barnabas find out about the plot, and they get word, and they decide to flee to the next city. And that's the one I want to talk about and read a little bit more. They go to off to Lystra. Now, while they're there, one of the first things that happens, they see a man that's sitting on a street corner. And this man was a beggar on the street that had been lame his whole life. In fact, verse 8 in chapter 14 says that he had been that way from birth, and he'd never walked. Never walked a day in his life. And his whole life consisted of sitting on a street corner with a cup in his hand asking for money that he might get a little bit of food that day and he could continue to live. Well, Paul looks at him and sees him, and he notices something about this man is different, and he's gleaning the words of Paul. And he can tell in him that he has faith, and he has hope, and he has the kind of faith that could heal him. And so Paul does heal him. He heals him, and the man suddenly, that has never walked in a day in his life, is now walking and jumping and running through the town. And as you can imagine, that creates another stir in this city, and we'll pick up our story there in verse 11 of Acts chapter 14. It says, when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they shouted in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in human form." Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called him Hermes because he was the chief speaker. It's the mythology there and their superstitions. The priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates because he and the crowd wanted to offer sacrifices to them. But when the apostle Barnabas and Paul heard of this, they tore their clothes and rushed out into the crowd shouting, "Friends, why are you doing this? We too are only human, like you. We are bringing you good news, telling you to turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and everything in them. In the past, he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony. He has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their season. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy." But even with these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. So we'll stop right there and kind of consider what's going on here, and again, hopefully draw or glean some insights and thoughts. But so Paul goes and he heals this man who had been lame. And when the whole city finds out, they're all amazed at this. And they're in wonder, how could this happen? And so they decide that Paul and Barnabas must be the gods come down. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, would we not have the same reaction today? Amazing if a man that we knew had never walked a day in his life suddenly is up and jumping and running and walking. I mean, unbelievable. And they didn't know how to respond, and so they just assumed that they must be their gods that they prayed to and their gods that they believed in. They didn't have faith yet in the one true God, only their superstitions that were still holding on. And so they're amazed at this, and they thought, we need to appease the gods. We need to give them offerings. We need to give them sacrifices. We need to give them gifts so the gods are happy with us and that they'll continue to bless us. They'll continue to show favor on us. They'll continue to take care of us. And Paul and Barnabas, of course, they don't want these accolades. They don't want these good tidings lavished upon them. They want people to see the goodness of God, the power of God. They want to see faith in Jesus Christ. They say, no, not us. We're just humans. We're just like you. We're just the messengers. Worship God. Worship God. And they try to turn their attention to them. We're nobody special. We're not the gods. Don't worship us. And Paul says to them, turn from these worthless things to the living God. Now, Paul and Barnabas were greatly troubled by all this response. In fact, I find it interesting in verse 14 how it says they tore their clothes. Now, if you are a Bible reader, you've seen that happen in lots of stories. And it's a phrase that I find interesting just because it's certainly not a part of my culture. It's not a part of our culture. And so it's hard to maybe understand what's going on there. It's hard to kind of get to figure that out. It's obvious that it's some kind of a sign of concern and disagreement and so forth. But I found it helpful what Bible expert Sam O'Neill wrote about this, and I think he sheds a little bit of light on this idea of tearing your clothes, and I think it's going to help us understand something a little bit later on. He writes this, as you think about why would they tear their clothes to demonstrate grief and that they're upset or they're against something? Well, the answer, he says, has everything to do with the economics of ancient days. Because the Israelites had an agrarian society, clothing was a very valuable commodity. Nothing was mass-produced. Clothes were time-intensive and expensive, which meant that most people in those days only had a very limited wardrobe. And for that reason, people who tore their clothes were showing just how upset they felt inside. By damaging one of their more important and expensive possessions, they reflected the depth of their emotional pain. That's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm kind of a cheap guy when I'm looking for clothes. And I like to shop the clearance rack, and I like to find the stuff that's, out of season and save money. And even me, so I got pretty cheap clothes. I don't go around tearing my clothes to show how upset I am. I mean, my goodness, I don't want to buy another shirt. I don't want to spend more money on the clearance section. So it makes kind of a lot of sense. That it was a way of demonstrating that how we have a tendency to put so much value in worthless earthly things and forget the great value in the unseen and the godly and the divine things. And here, so Paul and Barnabas, they're tearing their clothes to show how disappointed they were. They thought that they could bring happiness to them. They thought that they could honor them. They thought they could keep the favors as God, keep the favor coming to the people by giving of gifts. In a very real sense, the same way, they are showing that their clothes are just really worthless and meaningless in terms of earthly value. They're a necessity that we have, but they're not the things of value. And these gifts and these offerings that the people were giving to them, trying to win their favor as gods, was just as worthless and just as meaningless. And they tried to turn them away from these worthless earthly things and towards the living God. Now, I mentioned that we've been talking about the Advent conspiracy. Cameron's got a little slide for us. We spent more time on this last year, but each week we talked about a different aspect of the Advent conspiracy. And what this is just a group of Christians. I think it even started with a single church that looked at this thing we call Christmas and said, it's kind of gotten out of hand. Christmas has gotten a little bit crazy on us all. And maybe we could do it different. Maybe we could look at Christmas a little bit differently, but what would it take to actually change it? If we want Christmas to be more Christian and more godly and more a season and a celebration that would reflect our values, what can we do about it? And they came up with 4 areas that we could look at. And this idea has spread like wildfire across the country. Because I think there's a lot of us going, we agree, Christmas has gotten a little bit out of hand. And maybe it could be different. Maybe it could actually be about worshiping the Savior. And so they said, what can we do to change it around? And they said, first of all, we need to learn how to worship God fully. We need to worship God fully. So we gather not to sing our favorite Christmas carol of the season. We gathered to worship the Lord. We don't light the Advent candle because that's what we've done every year since the beginning of time. Instead, we use it as an opportunity to remind us that we're getting closer and closer and closer to the celebration of the arrival of our Savior. And every reading is filled with thoughts and ideas and trying to kind of mold and shape our hearts to prepare us and make room for Jesus to dwell within us. We want to worship fully. And how do we treat our family? How are we treating our friends? How are we treating those that we're passing by as we're out in the city streets? That our life and how we're living is about sharing the joy and the love of Christ, and that we worship God in our whole lives. And so how can we worship more fully this Christmas season? And second of all, they said, what if we spent a little bit less on stuff we don't need? Don't we all feel that pressure of buying stuff for people that already have more than we do, or we don't know what to get because they already got everything they need, or we don't really, I have family that I only really spend time with at Christmas Eve. And so there was always this obligation to buy a gift because they were going to get me something. I don't know nothing about them. I haven't seen them all year. What are they interested in and into? And I don't know how to do it. And so last minute, you're running out and buying one more gift card just to do something, or you're buying a giant box of popcorn because it has a Christmas decoration on it. And we're buying stuff for kids, toys for kids that are broken in a couple of days, or they have more fun with the box than the toy that was inside, right? And so we're spending all this. That video was actually a couple years old now. I think that was from 2012. It said back in 2012 that we spent $500 billion, right? $500 billion on Christmas. Now that was during a more difficult, there's a sense at least that the economy is strengthening. And last year I would bet we did a way lot more than that, if that was kind of the standard then. But even if we use that number, if we just took 1% of $500 billion, money spent on food and clothes and gifts and stuff, it's not take away Christmas, but just spend a little less, then we could give more to things that matter. We could give a little bit extra somewhere that counted and that made a difference. We could do some things like plant churches, spread the gospel. Every person in the world could have clean water if we would just give up a little bit of Christmas we don't need. Amazing. And we can work and do things in areas that make a difference. And then love all, that we could learn how to love everybody at Christmas time. You see, because we have to ask the question, and I think we should really wrestle with this question. Is Christmas a holiday that favors the rich or the poor? I think if we were honest and we looked at our spending and our traditions and our habits, if we looked at the bulk of it, it really benefits the wealthy. You know, my whole adult life, I have hated Christmas. I have. When we were young and had kids, and we were barely making the mortgage, and we couldn't even turn the heat on in our house because we couldn't afford to pay for it. I remember one time Sandy had a friend come over and give her a haircut, and it was so cold in the house. I come walking in to check on them. They'd opened the oven and turned on the oven so that her hands would quit shaking while she was cutting her hair. It was cold. And we're barely making it by on the stuff we had to take care of. And on top of it, we had to figure out how to pay for all this stuff. And this bitterness grew in my heart. Just to be honest, it did. I hated it. I did the church stuff. I did the family stuff. I laughed and smiled with everybody. And every time we had to go to the shopping mall to get something, it was a big fight between me and Sandy. And every time I heard a Christmas song, it was like chalk noise in my ears. You know, I mean, I was loathing this season. Now, later in life, I could tell you that some of that has relaxed, some of it has gotten easier, but that bitterness about Christmas for me has remained. And I just couldn't stand the season. Now, I know that's not everybody's experience. Some people love it. Some people love Christmas. I have a family member, I have an aunt that lives for Christmas. I mean, the front lawn is decorated. The house has the lights on it. Every room in the house. I'm talking the living room, all the bedrooms, the bathroom, the kitchen, the dining room, the family room, the second family room. I mean, every room is decorated from ceiling to floor with Christmas stuff. I don't know why they take it down, because it would take all year to put it back up. I don't get that. So she just loves Christmas. And if you don't believe me that she loves Christmas, she has asked me to do her funeral. And now, not yet. She's not ready yet. But when the time comes, she's asked me to do her funeral. And she has it all planned out. And it's a Christmas-themed funeral. She wants Christmas trees decorated. She wants Christmas carols sung by those that gather. She wants Christmas readings shared. I mean, she is Mrs. Christmas. And I began to suggest to our family that we don't need to spend all the money that we do on each other, but maybe we could do something different. And she thought I was stealing Christmas from her. It was tough. I mean, I had family members calling me, "What are you doing to your aunt?" There was yelling involved. There was crying involved. I mean, it was difficult. Just to suggest, hey, do you think we could maybe not share gifts among the adults this year? I know, it was, you thought I was preaching heresy in the church. Unbelievable. The first year was rough. The second year, we kind of got the idea, and our family pooled money together. We bought a cow for a village. And another time, we all donated to our favorite charities. And so we've tried to find some other creative things. This year, I got a new idea. It's just a little twist on that. But it was suggested to me, what if I donate to the charity that they like? So find out what my family's like, what's their favorite charity, and then donate to their favorite charity for them. So there's creative things that we can do with this idea. But can I tell you then, my heart has changed dramatically in this season. These last few years have been the best Christmases of my life. As it's just been reframed for me. It's just been reorganized. And I know that I'm kind of way off the text that we just read, except to say, they said, why are you giving to these worthless things? Turn instead towards the living God. Is Christmas helping you, the way you celebrate Christmas, is it helping you turn towards the living God? Or does it still have you captive in the worthless things? And we should think about that. The first one of the season, of this was to worship fully. Worship fully. Is your whole heart engaged in the knowledge, the understanding, and the worship of what it means that our Savior has come to dwell amongst us? You know, it was interesting at the end of that text, he said that, they talked to him, hey, we're just human beings. Turn from worthless things and towards the living God. He said he made the heavens, he made the earth, he made the seas and everything in it. They pleaded with them that God is the one that deserves your worship, and he blesses you with rain and the crops and the food, and beyond that, he fills your heart with joy, they said. And then verse 18 said, but even with all these words, they had difficulty keeping the crowd from changing what they were doing. Difficult keeping the crowd from sacrificing to them. And so we keep beating this drum. Christmas has come again, and so here's the drum beat once more. Because it's difficult in a single sermon, in a single season, to change this thing. We have decades and centuries of Christmas tradition that we're fighting. And so it's going to take intention and a coordinated attack to try to change how we celebrate Christmas. But let's not be like these that tried to appease these humans and appease their idea of God with worthless items, but let's instead turn to the living God.